Zach Osterman from the Indy Star joining us now. Papa Zach, how are you, sir?
Hey, how we doing?
Good, good. I had AJ Moye on the post-game show last night. He also is a new father. He has two other children, but he's got a 2-month-old as well, or 2-month-old. So lots of babies going around.
Is it? I don't know if yeah. Maybe it's just because we're both from Atlanta.
There you go. Jason Austin's asked if we had talked about the suspect officiating last night, and I've seen people talk about it. No, because you can't do anything about that, and that really doesn't have anything to do with how Indiana played. I don't think their mistakes were self-inflicted, and we've talked a lot about it so far today. Obviously, the turnovers were the most critical killer for this team last night, and we've seen 3 different games, Zach, where this team has had 20-plus turnovers, and that's not a good sign, especially when one of them comes already in Big Ten play.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably what would maybe frustrate Mike Woodson the most is the degree to which the turnovers had really come down recently. I mean, if you look at their turnover rate, the previous 3 games, Penn State, it was 10.1%, Ohio State, 13.3%, Minnesota, 9.5%. Those are all outstanding numbers. And then last night was 31.8%. I mean, that's, if I'm not mistaken, 31.8% is by some distance Indiana's worst against a high major opponent this season. It is, now that I'm looking at it. I guess Syracuse wasn't great, 27.5, but the reason why, I mean, I said multiple times in the buildup to last night's game that I thought it was a swing game for Indiana, because I thought Indiana was sort of building its way in a certain direction that felt very promising, in large part because those turnovers had really started to come down. And it's not just that they turned the ball over in that game. It's kind of what I think was reflected in it. Just the lack of poise, the loss of poise. I mean, for a team that at times really felt like it was in control of that game. And if you want a sort of a glass half full look at this is the 3rd time we've seen Indiana play a meaningful road game. I would argue Syracuse and Wisconsin, particularly Wisconsin in different ways, also reflected this too, where Indiana was really in control, and not just like, they're on an 8-0 run. Like, Indiana was really kind of dictating the terms of the game. Indiana was outplaying a good team on the road. And to me, that says that the capacity to put all of that together is there, and the ability at some point to start finishing these games off is the potential is there. But in the same breath, to see your lead guards just kind of lose their grip on the game so easily is frustrating if you're an Indiana fan, and is, at some level perhaps frankly worrisome too.
Yeah, Dylan.
Yeah, I mean, that was, I guess that's something we've been kind of talking about the entire time, Zach, is how do you go about, is there someone on the roster outside of Xavier Johnson and Rob Finney you would like to see have the ball in their hands more, considering that Finney and Johnson were not able to avoid the turnovers last night, which is something that they had been doing, as you said, in previous games?
I mean, I don't, forgive me, I think that a lot of people want to say the answer is Christian Lander, and maybe
if it was, he'd be in there probably. My answer to that is, if it was, he'd be in there.
Yes, and I'd point out too, I mean, first of all, you should point out that Xavier Johnson and Rob Finney had better games leading up to this one, and you're allowed to have a bad game. Like, listen, if I told you nothing about the result of last night's game other than Indiana would lose by 9, you'd be like, okay,
on the road.
Enough. It's Iowa on the road. That's not a bad loss, and it's not a bad loss. I mean, it can be a frustrating loss, But in the grander scheme of Indiana's season, it's not a bad loss. Nobody's going to come back at the end of the year and say you lost by 9 at Iowa. You're not allowed in the NCAA tournament. That's not going to happen. But you can be frustrated in the manner, and obviously from Indiana's perspective, they need to get better from it. The things I've said about Christian Lander, and again, I know he hasn't gotten a ton of playing time to maybe, prove otherwise or to improve on this. The things I have said about Christian Lander are, number one, his turnover rate is way too high. His turnover rate overall this season is 40.4%. That is enormous. And he commits too many fouls. He commits 5.7 fouls per 40 minutes. You've already got, first of all, I think people need to recognize, even after last night, Xavier Johnson doesn't turn the ball over nearly as often as they think he does. Xavier Johnson's turnover rate is only 21.1%. It is basically half of what Christian Lander's turnover rate is. And he's obviously playing a lot more minutes against, at this point, tougher company. This is not me picking on Christian Lander. I'm just saying, if I'm sitting in Mike Woodson's seat and I'm looking at these numbers, Xavier Johnson can be frustrating in the way that he plays. He takes risks, he takes long chances, and sometimes those don't pay off. And he sometimes gives the impression he plays a little bit out of control. If you look at his numbers, though, they're still good. Before last night, his turnover rate in Big Ten play alone was under 13%. Rob Finney's was around 12%. And the other issue I think that you have if you're Indiana looking at Christian Lander is the bigger criticism I would have of Xavier Johnson, and it was a problem last night, is he gets in foul trouble. And when he gets in foul trouble, number one, obviously he can't be on the floor, but number two, it feels like he loses his feel for the flow of the game. And he comes back in, he's like Xavier Johnson to me is very much a flow player. The more he plays, the better he gets. And when his minutes get all chopped up because you're pulling him in and out because he's in foul trouble, he loses his feel for the game as a point guard. And that's when I think sometimes the decision-making kind of goes a little bit awry. But Christian Lander averages more fouls per 40 minutes than he does. So can your backup point guard be as foul prone as your starting point guard? No, he can't. And so I think that's why you don't see Christian Lander as often. I think it's also worth pointing out, Tamar Bates, I think, has struggled, kind of to find a comfort level at the Big Ten level so far. He was a player that I think Indiana toyed with putting the ball in his hands more often. Trey Galloway is another player that I think Indiana has a level of trust in bringing the ball up the floor. It's worth pointing out he commits 3 turnovers in 18 minutes last night. So you can't, it's, and I don't think anybody would ever want Trey Galloway to be a full-time point guard. But my point is, point guards are always going to kind of be lightning rods for criticism around these sorts of things. And I get that. And I understand why. It's the closest thing you have to a quarterback in basketball. They're at the scene of a lot of what's good or what's bad. And when they struggle or they make mistakes, those mistakes are often magnified. We saw that last night. But, Indiana committed 23 turnovers Thursday night. Rob Finney and Xavier Johnson only accounted for 8 of them. So, Race Thompson had 5. Race Thompson committed more than either of them. Trey Galloway, again, had 3 off the bench. Where I do think, honestly, more than the turnovers, because I was watching the game from home, I think more than the turnovers, where Mike Woodson may be disappointed in Xavier Johnson and Rob Finney, is that it felt for a long time in that second half like Indiana just needed somebody to slow them down and just say, just take a breath. Everything's okay. Everything's fine. Wisconsin, I was in the building for that when I wasn't in the building for Iowa, but in that second half, there was almost sort of this inevitability as that half wore on about just how Wisconsin was gaining steam. Johnny Davis was making tough shots. Brad Davison was coming into the game, all these different things. It didn't feel that way last night. There was a long stretch, even as Iowa was pushing ahead, where it felt like Indiana was still – the game was still very much there for Indiana. And I think if you are Mike Woodson or his staff, maybe the greater disappointment is to look at 2 fourth-year point guards and say, we just needed you to settle it down a little bit, and you couldn't. Just a little bit, not much. That didn't feel like you were there, Jim. That didn't feel from the TV like in a road atmosphere. You just needed to settle everything down for just 2 minutes, and they couldn't do it. Instead, those were the guys that got sped up. Those are the guys that were dribbling into the trap and creating, succumbing to the pressure and creating problems. And it just kind of, it snowballed.
Yeah, but I wonder now, is it in X's DNA to be able to do that? We see him do it some games, but it's like he can't help himself. He's right back at it. And it's not that he's trying to be malicious. He's seeing what he thinks will work, but obviously it's not working all the time. And it's like having a Troy Williams at point guard sometimes for Indiana from the old days, but obviously he wasn't a point guard, but similar situation with just kind of seeming like they're out of control. But Trey Galloway seems like a very intriguing possibility at point. I'm not saying starting point guard, but to run the ball, because he seems to make good decisions. He's a coach's son. He doesn't get frazzled. I wouldn't mind seeing that. Not as a starter, like I said, but just to see something different, because this offense has not found its flow yet from really facilitating.
Have we talked ourselves into Trey Galloway being the backup quarterback, the most popular guy on the team at this point?
Trey Galloway's turnover rate is 26%.
Oh, there you go.
His turnover rate in conference play alone is almost 25%. I mean, like it just, again, I think Xavier Johnson suffers a little bit from sort of what Dylan's talking about, in the sense that he's the starting point guard. And again, he tends to be, he tends to kind of play on the edge a little bit more, which is good because he can handle that edge better than most players. And even after last night, and last night was an undeniably ugly game, but even after last night, in 6 conference games, his assist rate is 31.7%. His turnover rate is 15.9%. And that's when you've already played at Wisconsin and at Iowa. You've played Ohio State at home. You had a bad day at Penn State. If those are his numbers at the end of the Big Ten season, you're thrilled. And those are in Big Ten games alone. But if those are his numbers at the end of the Big Ten season, you're thrilled.
The only thing I'd like to see more from him, Dylan, is facilitating more 3-point shots for other guys. He does fine getting the ball inside, but they're not getting the perimeter shots. He gets a lot of them, but it just doesn't seem like that offense allows for as many perimeter shots for the guys that need to be taking them.
Yeah, I think that's an issue. But I do think that part of it is that when they get the ball into Trace is the one that's facilitating the threes on a lot of occasions. So it basically once X gets the ball inside, that's where the threes come from.
I think that, like, I was going to say something similar. I think the offense is designed to run those sets through Trace more so.
Right.
I don't like it's a lot of what this offense tries to do is basically post up first. They're very purposeful about posting up and then playing out of that. When they go high-low or they play, sort of pick and roll game, a lot more of that feels designed for the big. Like, a lot more of that feels designed for Trace or Race. Yes, sometimes it leads to a kick out. But I think the way the offense is designed by design, I think more of those shots are supposed to be coming from basically playing inside out.